It is March Madness time, and Joe Nocera is mad at the NCAA. The New York Times op-ed columnist spells out why in his new book. It's called Indentured, the inside story of the rebellion against the NCAA. I spoke with Nocera about it earlier today. Joe, on this program we've asked many times, especially when March rolls around, whether NCAA athletes should be paid. In your book Indentured, you seem to go even further, making the case the NCAA actually harms some student athletes, correct?
I do believe that for sure.
Could you give me an example, a particularly glaring one?
How it harms student athletes? Sure. They don't get the education that their scholarship promises because they're practicing 50 hours a week, and their travel schedules are ridiculous, and their classes are substandard. And in the case of University of North Carolina, they even had fake classes. I mean, they major in eligibility. I mean, that's just one way. You know, another way is just the severe restrictions they place on athletes' actions. How many times you can eat in someone's house per semester, whether you can have a part-time job, whether, on stuff like academic fraud, there's some bureaucrat in Indianapolis ruling on whether you've committed it rather than the honor system at the university. High school athletes are always under various sorts of investigations because the NCAA is suspicious of this or that. I mean, it's a system that is designed to keep the athletes in their place. I mean, that's just what it is. To make sure that, and it doesn't allow them to act like every other student on campus, and I just think that's wrong.
So when we hear counter-arguments to people who say that you shouldn't pay NCAA athletes, and they'll say, well, they're probably being paid anyway, or these guys will just go pro, or, how would you counter those counterpoints for people who say, well, they're either being paid or they're being taken care of, or they get that scholarship?
Right. So the number one argument is that they're getting a scholarship and a chance at a better life. And my argument is, great, if they actually are, that's fine. Although I still think they should get paid for their labors beyond that. So, but they, in many cases, in too many cases, they're not getting that education. And that's just wrong. Secondly, only 5% of football players or men's basketball players go pro. So there's 95% who have a very small window to make money on their athletic ability. And that window is college. And the NCAA takes that window away. The third argument is, well, if you say the scholarship is enough, what you're really saying is they are compensated, but their compensation is capped by the amount of a scholarship. My argument to that is, who gave the NCAA the right to cap compensation? Why are they in the compensation business in the first place? Why aren't conferences taking care of that? Why isn't the universities taking care of that? Why do you have a national organization that serves as a cartel to suppress the compensation of the workforce? I mean, in economic terms, it's pretty black and white.
But if you alter the system, Joe, don't you throw into jeopardy the fate of other athletes, the ones who aren't top flight athletes who are likely to go pro, or the athletes who are in sports that don't have a professional realm to it, like field hockey or rifle or water polo?
Well, first of all, I would argue that football and men's basketball are in a different category from all other athletes. I personally believe that every athlete on campus, no matter what sport, should be allowed to do what Olympic athletes can do, which is you don't get paid for the sport, but you can get paid for endorsements or, sponsorships or signing autographs. I think that is a basic right that all athletes should have. As for the football and basketball players, I would argue that they are not really student athletes, they're employee athletes, whose fundamental job is to generate revenue for the university. That's why they're there. Football comes first, basketball comes first. School comes way, way, way second to that, as we all know. And so I would treat them in a different way as I treat every other athlete on campus, and I would compensate them because they are there to make money for the school.
You called the NCAA a cartel. How much of its rules and enforcement today are aimed at self-perpetuating its own power versus, let's say, protecting the student athlete?
Well, what are they protecting the student athletes from? They say they're protecting them from rank commercialism, but everything about the NCAA is commercial. I mean, it's a giant commercial enterprise where coaches make millions, assistant coaches make, over $1 million, conference commissioners make 2, 3, $4 million. The NCAA itself is going to take in $1 billion over the next 3 weeks, and yet the athletes are being protected from something? I mean, no. I mean, the rules have two purposes. The overt purpose is to have a competitive playing field, so nobody has a recruiting advantage or any kind of advantage over anybody else. But the second purpose of the rule is to basically make sure that none of this money gets to the players. And that's why, you know, when money does get to a player in one way, shape, or form, or to the player's mother who wants to make a recruiting visit with the player, that's viewed as an improper benefit and is punished.
The union lawsuit stemming out of Northwestern football didn't go anywhere. Do you feel like we're moving closer to a tipping point where perhaps there'll be enough pressure to actually change the rules?
No, I don't. I think there's some litigation coming down the pike that might change things, but that's 4 or 5 years away. And even if they were to win, the NCAA would almost surely go to court and try to get an antitrust exemption so they could keep the things the way they are. I think the only way you're ever going to see real change and real reform is if some team refuses to come out for the Final Four and goes on strike, like the Missouri football players did this fall over racial incidents on campus.
Finally, Joe, will you actually watch the NCAA tournament, or has the system left such a bad taste in your mouth that you just can't watch?
Listen, I grew up on college basketball in Providence, Rhode Island. You know, I'm going to root. I'm going to watch. People love college sports. I love college sports. I just think the system should be fairer to the athletes themselves.
Joe Nocera, a New York Times columnist and author of Indentured, the inside story of the rebellion against the NCAA. Joe, thanks so much for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me.
We'll take a quick break. When we come back, your Hudson Valley headlines.